Winning Plays Podcast is back. Celtics training camp is here. And wouldn't you know it, the team has made its first big roster move of the week. Blake Griffin will be signing a guaranteed deal with the Celtics this week. Should be in camp, maybe in uniform for their first preseason game on Sunday. And this, I would have to say, was pretty unexpected. My name is Brian Robb. I'm joined today by my partner in crime at Mass Live, Souichi Terada, who actually had a front row look at Blake Griffin back in the glory days in Detroit. Souichi is a Michigan man or Michigan State man, I should say, for in his collegiate days. A Detroit fan way back in the day. Poor guy. But Souichi, so this was Blake has been out of Detroit now for 2 years, I guess, right? He got bought out like in the middle of the 2021 season, I believe.
Yes. Yep. 2021 or 2021, 22 or 2020, 2021 was the year he got bought out.
And yes. So he's gone from 20 points per game, I think a couple years ago, like in those, or maybe not that year, the year before that with Detroit, to literally signing in the middle of training camp for a veterans minimum deal. It's been a bit of a fall for Blake. There's obviously been health issues.
Not too surprising, though.
Not too surprising given what he is, but I don't know. I mean, the backdrop to this signing obviously is the news that Luke Cornett is going to be out for a couple weeks here with an ankle sprain, and obviously on top of the Rob Williams and Danilo Gallinari news. So the Celtics clearly need some front court depth here, Souichi, and I don't know, like there's obviously plenty of options out there, whether it was Blake or LaMarcus Aldridge or Carmelo. Like where do you rank the fit out of those guys, or at least any other guy that was out on the free agent market right now?
I mean, are they really, I don't know, like when you talk about like LaMarcus Aldridge, Carmelo, like are they really that different, I guess, at this point in their careers? I guess Carmelo will probably score more, and everything like that. But it's just kind of like they're all, former, very well-respected, very talented former all-stars, but it's just they're in the twilight of their careers. I think this is a good move. Obviously, like you said, it's a bit unexpected. It's kind of crazy to think about, but Blake's last really good year was 2018-19. So that's 4 years ago. It's crazy. He was all NBA that year. He had like a 50-point game against the Sixers. Like it wasn't realistic, but early MVP hype. Like he looked really good that year. And I think I was really impressed as you said, front row seat with Blake was he kind of like he matured his game, remember when he was like first started out and was an all-star in his first year in the league, he was dunking everything, right? And he didn't really have that much of an offensive game, but now he does. So I think in terms of the fit though with the Celtics, I wrote about it at masslive.com, but it's just I think one, you don't expect him to play more than a dozen minutes a game, because if you do, that means, it's either the rare night where Al's sitting on a back-to-back or something, but you don't want Blake Griffin playing that much, but two, you're not expecting him to be some big contributor. Obviously he got signed in the middle of training camp. So, but he can still do some okay things. He showed a little bit, right? Against the Celtics in the playoffs when he was with the Nets last year. I think the biggest question mark is just defensively. We saw Jaylen Brown go after Blake multiple times, just ruthlessly in the playoffs. So you can hide that in the regular season, not so much the playoffs, but I think this is mostly a regular season signing, D-Rob. I don't think you're going to expect much from Blake. Maybe he has one good game where he turns back the clock, but this is pretty much, hey, we need somebody to eat minutes at the front court, especially with Cornett going to be out 1 to 2 weeks. Who at this point, who's the backup bigs right now? It's Al, it's Grant, and it's Blake Griffin. Then you got Cotton Galley and all those other kind of unproven guys. So I think it's a good signing. I kind of thought about this. I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't think it's a bad idea to add a veteran voice in that locker room. Blake Griffin, of all people, knows what it's like when an organization is in turmoil. I remember Donald Sterling and the Clippers. Sure. Obviously, that's a different magnitude than what's happening with Ime and the Celtics right now. But it's just, I don't think it's a bad idea to add somebody well-respected,
And last year in Brooklyn,
guys, too. Yeah. Last year in Brooklyn was a different thing. That was a player thing.
Yeah, that was a player thing. Yeah, that's true. That's it. Yeah, certainly different type of turmoil.
Yeah, dysfunction. Yeah.
Yeah. So you brought up. So let's talk about Blake Griffin in last year's postseason. Since it's funny. That's obviously everyone's last memory of him. Is he didn't even play the first 2 games of the first round series. And it was kind of in and out of the rotation for Brooklyn. towards the end of the year, but then was clearly out of it when the series started. And then he came in. He actually played well offensively in game 3, which I don't even remember that part, but he had 8 points and a rebound.
He had like a couple of threes, I think.
A couple of threes, exactly. Yeah, he had a couple of open threes, and kind of maybe because they were just searching for offense in that game, and so he stretched the floor a little bit. And then he got a bigger role in game 4, and I think that's what people really remember. And he actually was like a spark off the bench. He had 4 assists in that game. Was kind of like you said, the seasoning of his game that we kind of saw in Detroit as a bit of a playmaker was on display here. But then obviously Jalen just kept cooking him in the fourth quarter, possession after possession. And like you said, though, I don't mind that, because in the regular season, A, he's not going to be on the floor for those kind of moments, I feel like. And B, that's just not going to be their defensive scheme with him on the court, period, of the switching. So
and personnel wise, you can probably hide him a little bit more in the regular season, I think.
Right.
And then I also think it's just this idea that he's really I just don't think the Celtics, unless a bunch of injury happens, I just don't think the Celtics are going to get to the same point as the Nets, where Steve Nash was just throwing anybody at the wall. I feel like in games 3 and 4. I just think this team is too deep when they are fully healthy, and that's kind of the goal for the playoffs. It's basically breaking. If you need to break this glass in case of emergency, that is Blake Griffin in playoffs next spring, then you're in trouble. But I just don't think the Celtics, with their depth as of right now, necessarily need that. This is more for the regular season, which I think is a good thing.
Exactly. And so to me, what it really is from, once Cornette went down, they got a week look at these guys in camp. We're do we really how much do we trust Vonleh and Jake Layman and Kevin Gelly? And I think what Griffin brings is the offensive upside element for a backup big. And I assume defensively, probably both sides, where he's probably gonna be playing a center. I don't think they're gonna be having him trying to guard even stretch forwards, because that's just not a smart idea. But he's a big guy who can pass the ball, and traditionally can at least have a threat of hitting threes. He only shot, that's the alarming thing last year. I think he shot 26% from 3, but he's a career 33% shooter. And so that's at least something where if you can at least force defenses to respect him from that standpoint and make defenses pay for, switching on to some degree and finding the open guy, that is something that will work with the second unit, especially when you have guys you're playing with Brogdon and Derek White off the second unit. That's you're going to have guys that are going to be able to set you up there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think we saw it in the playoffs last year. I think Blake's going to play hard. I think he, at this point, you're pretty clearly in the twilight end of your career. You want that ring. And I think he's just going to play really hard when he has that opportunity. So I think that's kind of an underrated part too, of just these veterans, one last kind of thing, we saw David West do it. We saw a bunch of veterans do it last decade. So I think that's the biggest thing. And I think that'll help culturally, some of the younger guys, they see Blake Griffin, this dude has had so many injuries, but he's still going to go out there and play really hard and be really sweaty. So I just think from kind of the intangibles aspect, that I thought there was some upside. I am curious to see, I guess I don't really know too much about his locker room presence or whatever, but on the Pistons, it was pretty although that was a very young team when he was on the team, and they praised him too. So I think in terms of the veteran aspect, I like it a lot, just because for all intents and purposes, he seems like a good dude. I watched some of his stand-up comedy and found it generally funny. So maybe he'll do a little bit of that in Boston.
Yeah, he's certainly he's out there as a personality, where he's probably going to be maybe one of the more engaging quotes that we'll have in a locker room for this upcoming season. So definitely not a bad signing from that standpoint. And so now I look at, let's look at big picture at the roster now a little bit. So you have, he essentially gives, I think we have 13 safe spots for the Celtics now. I think Cornette seems to be pretty safe, even with this ankle injury. Sam Hauser, and then Griffin makes 13. So now you're left with essentially 6 guys fighting it out for 2 spots on the rest of the roster.
And if the Celtics don't like these 6 guys and only one guy, they can keep one open.
Yeah, so that's a really good point.
6 guys for one roster spot.
Well, here's the thing though. Would you I almost think now they have to carry, because you have Rob Williams and Gallinari out. So you're even say if you keep 14, That's literally only 12. And then
at your healthiest, that's
at your healthiest. And then, which is like, 12's plenty. Like you're probably only going to play, 9, 10 or at the most regardless. But then if one more injury happens, and it's like, oh.
Though I do wonder. I was just gonna say, like, I think Kabengele would probably slide in. They would probably call.
That's true. They have a two-way guy. So you're like 14. Like,
Well, I just don't see a scenario where JD Davis. No, JD. Unless it's like a COVID thing, like Broderick Thomas was kind of forced into some games. Like a couple of games, right? Like, and I guess if it's like a literal, everyone is like, your other options are 10-day guys. I think that's pretty much it. But I just think Kabengele is one guy you can kind of move down, but otherwise that's a good point.
I don't know. Like he might be freaking starting opening night now. I feel like depending on what, because if they had Luke Cornett out there for like the start of training, we'll get into training camp a little bit right now in terms of like what's going on so far. But if Luke Cornett if the plan was to start Cornett with this, as like 10, 15 minutes of the starters each night, which is a way to bridge the gap, and you can keep Grant Williams with the bench unit and keep that kind of continuity going and keep Al Horford at the 4, which I think he likes. So now you bring Blake in, Fake Cornett is out for a couple of weeks and just isn't going to be ready for opening night. And they're not going to throw him into the mix. Like, what are your options there? You can obviously, the safe play would be like throw Grant in at the 4.
I think it would be Grant, right? Yeah.
But then your bench guy, like your bench bigs are Blake and it's like, that's like guys who have not been to the team. So I feel like, I wonder if they're like, okay, who can we? They could go small too, but I think
Marcus. You can
Marcus,
obviously Malcolm, Jason, Jalen, Al. You could do that if you really want Grant off the bench.
But I bet they really like. I feel like they really like to keep Al at the 4 and like don't want to be.
Yeah, I agree. Especially the mileage. I just think the mileage thing is going to be such a huge thing with Al this year. I agree with that.
Because then it's like your options are Blake, Kabengele, like Vonleh if he makes the team. And that's it at like center. So it's like, and I don't know, like Jalen Tatum, they're kind of talking up Kabengele a little bit. Like,
he looked good at Summer League. He was like a spark plug, and he was hitting threes at Summer League. I was like, all right, okay, yeah.
So I mean, he played a full he was a full year in the G League last year after like being a late first round pick and then just never getting a chance anymore really, or / not looking good in LA or Cleveland.
He's a little older. Yeah, he's 25.
Yeah, he's 25.
He's a little bit older too.
Yep. So we'll find out. I mean, like we're gonna have a few of these preseason games, and they're gonna be trying out stuff, and we'll get a pretty decent glimpse of it. But that's my dark horse pick right now. Is that we're gonna if Cornett can't go, that's your opening night starter at center.
Well, he would probably be. I mean, I would assume he would get promoted from 2A in that regard.
Not necessarily though.
I guess not because I guess you don't need to yet.
Not yet. Like I think like down the road, like if he becomes a regular racer, then like okay, then we need him. Obviously, like maybe we're gonna use him in the playoffs. We need to upgrade him. But for now, it's like he can play 50 games on a 2-way without having to be.
Yeah, that's true.
Roster.
That's true. Chaotic choice right now.
Yeah.
When we're speaking about 2-ways in terms of like not like a big guy, but just like somebody you can like throw out into the mix there. Sam Hauser might just be like kind of for the size aspect of things, right? Though I don't know. I feel like Tatum playing the 4 is much more likely, and he obviously talked about that yesterday during practice. I just feel like that's like he's just like the second tallest player still, even after the Blake signing.
Right.
I think that they'll probably tinker with that a little bit more, but.
No, that's a good point.
I don't know.
Hauser's a good name here. Like Hauser does figure a lot more into this rotation now. And I think he's kind of forgotten because he's not a true center. But like you're looking for, who's gonna with Gallinari out, like your default, like who's gonna get minutes at the backup 4 if Grant plays the 5 is like Hauser. If they can get away with that small ball lineup.
Who would have thought? Not me. I wouldn't have thought that when he got signed. But hey, good for him. Team's clearly high on him and Luke. So
it's gonna be. I mean. It'll be an interesting. I mean, Joe Mazzulla has 1,000 things on his plate right now, but I'm very curious to see just how he handles. This is because this isn't like a regular training camp from a man. Like this is okay. You have 2 rotation players that are out till further notice. You still have a really good deep team here, but you have a bunch of other like mitigating factors where it's like, okay, we ran Tatum and Brown into the ground last year. We don't want to do that. Al Horford is not coming off of 6 months of rest in Oklahoma City this year. So we're going to have to like, despite his claim, are you believing in his claims that he's going to be playing back-to-backs this year? Are you immediate? Nope. Yeah, like that.
He might want to, right? I mean, it could be a situation like I remember like there was like a Detroit Indiana back to back on the road where they were like, Al's available if we need him. And then everyone was like, okay, Al's going to play 20 minutes. No, he just sat it out.
Yeah, he's on the bench.
I think that's more likely, basically. And he'll be in his warm ups, like he'll be like dressed, but like I don't think he'll be playing, basically. And like I don't know. With Al, it just felt like there were like 2 to 3 times late last year before the playoffs where I was like, hey Al, just how you feeling? Like how you feeling physically? He's like, oh, I'm okay. I'm doing good. I'm like, all right, clearly you're 35, 36 years old and you're tired. So I think I just think keeping Al fresh for the playoffs when inevitably, in almost like you play Giannis, like I just think that should just be their biggest priority, Like they're this roster's talented enough to win 50 games. So I think I was telling a few friends this, like I think the number one, like one of the biggest priorities for the Celtics and the Bucks this year is just making sure they don't meet in the second round again, basically. Like,
yeah.
I don't think they want that coaching course like a round earlier, like last season.
100%. That's the bracket in the East this year is going to be a bear, and that has to be priority number one, is just avoiding obviously what looks to be your East Coast favorite as late as possible. All right. What other takeaways you have from training camp here? We first of all, this is brand new. You're actually been able to go on the court for the first time. So at training camp for the first time since you've been on the job. For those who don't know, at the Auerbach Center during the height of the pandemic, we reporters were not allowed to converse or just get on the practice floor to see the drills up close or to talk to a player here or there. But now Souichi has actually been able to get boots on the ground, and I'm curious, what's your observations here from the first couple days?
Videos are a lot easier to take.
Yeah, right.
Instead of all the way high up, right? Like if you were wondering why the reporters' videos all sucked last year, it's because we had to go. We were like on a different floor, basically, just looking at them. Whereas, like, obviously, for on the court, that's like a completely different experience. But yeah, I just think the biggest takeaway I thought was just how normal everything seemed. Like I remember like rolling up on Tuesday, I'm like, what are the vibes going to be like? Because that's another thing too. Like you can kind of tell, right? Like it's not like anything like it's concrete, like numbers or anything, but you can kind of tell like if something is just kind of a miss and then like the players kind of maybe, hint at it or whatever, but everything seems pretty normal. I think, like Joe Mazzulla pretty much, I don't know how many times he has said patience and just keeping the players comfortable in the first, 4 days of his tenure when we had been able to speak to him. And that's kind of the vibe I'm getting so far. And I think that's a good sign of a leader. It's realistically, like we are sick, as much as you're sick about reading about the Ime Udoka suspension, we are probably as, B-Rob, especially because I was on PTO last week, like we're as sick. Yeah, right. Writing and reading and talking about suspension, but that's just how it is, right? Like it's just something you can't ignore. And I think the fact that they have been kind of not like ignoring it, but just kind of like taking it in stride, I think that's kind of the big thing so far in terms of all the other off-court stuff.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's because that can go one way or another, this situation. I guess, and the benefit I think to Mazzulla and the fact that why they put him in there is that you can tell that a lot of these guys are comfortable with him and have, a relationship that goes back with him to 2019, particularly the stars like Jaylen Brown. It sounded like did a lot of film stuff with him, particularly last season. And so if you have the buy-in and the comfort level from those guys, and then obviously everything else is the same, like, there's been no other shakeup to the staff really, that makes it being like, okay, yeah, this is practice. It's just, Ime's not here. And like that's weird, but we can, kind of get over that in terms of what our focuses are from that standpoint. So it's going to be, I'm just really fascinated though to see, like, I've heard a lot of things about Mazzulla, like from even before all this happened, in terms of his, his rise on the bench and how he was really good at scouting certain series and stuff in the postseason run last year and got, some pretty high acclaim for that. And so now you kind of get like when it's assistant coach for that stuff, you really don't get to know, like, okay, those guys don't get the accolades for that stuff, at least, in real time. Now we'll kind of get to see here, okay, can he, how much of that is going to be worked into his game plan on a nightly basis, or, kind of how he handles obviously everything else that comes with being a head coach.
Yeah, I mean, his rise is like, I don't know if fans know this too much, but he was a Division II head coach before coming on Brad Stevens, coaching staff. And that's an amazing glow. Like D2 head coach at NBA, interim coach in a few years. So one other thing too is I don't know how you felt about it, B-Rob, but like I remember I was just looking around and I'm like, okay, there's the core of guys. And then you're adding Malcolm Brogdon. And I just think that was like, obviously it was a very, huge move, impressive move during the offseason, but that, like actually like speaking to him and seeing him like practice with the team, like kind of put that into context. Like this team was at the NBA Finals last year with this core, and then you add somebody like Malcolm Brogdon. Like dude's a legitimate, like like he's probably not a perennial all-star by any means, but like dude is impressive. Like his resume is very impressive, and everything like that. So, and then the number one thing, right, like sacrifice and buying into the team, and he's been all about that. So I think he's impressed me too, just because I think he kind of jumped in front of that narrative, right? Ever since the press conference, like people were like, how are you going to work with Marcus? How are you going to work with all these other guys? But he's just been steady in terms of I just want to win. And he knows what winning looks like. His third year in Milwaukee, his last year, they won 60 games. And despite that, I wrote about it earlier this week. He still thinks this might be the most talented team he's ever played on. So you look around and I'm like, okay, I can see it. Like, 3 months removed from the finals run and they're trying to do it again. So.
Yeah, it is. That's like I think it's really important for him to get out front of that stuff, obviously, given the, situation of Smart in terms of the questioning there. But now it should make like the silver lining of all this injury stuff. It's like, okay, they're going to have to go small a good amount. And that's probably like going to be in their best interest to like probably play those guys together to close out games, at least to start while Rob's out, because unless Grant is coming out and like looking like, which is possible. It's possible he could be, your closing four next to Al Horford there then, but you might want just the added shooting and the added playmaking that Brogdon can kind of provide in that front. So it's, it'll be, from a talent standpoint, they're not going to have this group together, obviously, for a while from just the Rob aspect of it, but you do think that, they can kind of hit the ground running here. And I think the schedule out of the gate is obviously tough with Philly and Miami, but after that, like November is not too bad.
Yeah.
They should be able to get at least like, something going here and give themselves a chance at a, top 3, top 4 seed in that span when, they're dealing with the worst of the injuries.
Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, the injury luck obviously has not been great. And I just think it's the fact of when it happened, like if Gallo went down and like in some ways, if he was going to go down, like during the offseason wasn't the worst time just because you can like, there's still options on the free agent market.
Right.
Like, be able to hold out, but it's just like, I just think with early season injuries, like it's just one of those things where you just, right. Like they can overcome Gallo's injury, but it's just like, you don't already want to be dipping into your depth, right? Like the first preseason game hasn't even happened. We already have to talk about, the depth and what they can do. And I just think so far, I mean, obviously it hasn't been great, but not anything to be worried about yet, but it's just, you hate to dig deep into your depth at this point in the season, I think. So but like I said, Brad Stevens and company has at least been able to kind of counteract that through other options, at least. So at least that's a small silver lining, basically.
Yeah. Well, we'll get a first-hand look at that depth during next week. We got 3 preseason games coming up hot out of the hopper, starting on Sunday here. And Souichi and I will be all over it at masslive.com. Make sure you are following Souichi on Twitter at SOUICHI Terada, TERADA. And we'll be all over Blake's debut. What's your prediction? I assume we're not going to see him Sunday because that's a pretty rough turnaround for him. Are we going to see him next week in one of these games? Are they just going to throw him out for 10 minutes or give him more time to get into shape?
I think so about a third game, right? Because they play basically like 3 this first week, then they're off for a week, then they have the last one Friday. So I think the third game they'll try to, because they'll be acclimated and everything. And like, you don't want like, I don't know. He probably doesn't want his like only game action being that 4th game. So maybe that. But once again, the only caveat, remember, Juancho Hernan-Gomez started the first preseason game. Like, it is very early. Still very early. So not
read into everything.
Any overreactions. Yeah. Read all of our stuff.
Read into exactly.
But maybe not who's necessarily playing up there yet. Yeah. Still very early.
Oh, Juancho. What a time. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll be back with you guys next week to go through all that stuff. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe to the Winning Plays Pod. We'll be upping the pod numbers as the season gets closer here. And Souichi, as always, thanks for hopping aboard.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you guys next week.